3 years she walked into rooms full of men who wanted to fight her, and 3 years not one of them put her on the floor. She was a Muay Thai fighter out of Bangkok, and the afternoon this happened, she had her hands already half wrapped, the cotton trailing off one wrist, and she stood at the end of a long-worn gym and looked down the row of men who'd come to train that day. Big men. Men with reach. Men who had reputations in that city the way some men have money. She walked the row slow. She stopped at the smallest one in the room. 138 pounds of him, standing in a gray t-shirt near the bags, not even looking for a fight. She raised one wrapped hand and put a single finger out and pointed it straight at his chest across the floor, and she said one word. Then, nobody in that room moved. My father was there. He was standing against the side wall, near the window, where the afternoon came in dusty and gold, and he told me later he heard the word before he understood it, the way you hear a glass break in another room, and only after do you flinch. He told this part of the story like this. He said the gym went so quiet he could hear the cotton wrap still swinging off her wrist. He said the men who'd been loud a second before, and they had been loud, this was a loud room, a room of men showing each other their hands, went silent all at once, not because anyone told them to, but because every one of them had just understood the same thing she understood, and they understood it before the small man did. She hadn't picked the biggest. She hadn't picked the loudest. She'd walked past all of them. She'd picked the one who carried his own gloves and didn't talk. My father didn't know yet what he was about to watch. None of them did. But he said the shape of the afternoon was already set in that one word, the way the shape of a fall is set the moment your weight goes past your feet, and there's a long part still to come, but the answer's already decided. He said, "I've told you this one before." He had. He told it more than once, at the same table, and the coffee went cold the way it always did, and I'm telling it to you now the way it came to me, with the places he wasn't sure of left where they were. Let me tell you about her first, because you have to understand the row of men she walked past before you understand who she stopped at, and you have to understand her before you understand why the room went quiet. Here's what my father knew about her, and where he knew it from. She'd come up through the camps outside Bangkok, the real ones, the ones where boys are handed over young and where, sometimes, rarely, a girl is handed over too, and kept, because she's better than the boys and somebody with an eye saw it. My father didn't know her whole story. He was careful about that. He said he only ever knew the parts that came to him, from the men in that gym and from one trainer who'd watched her fight in Thailand and carried the account across an ocean the way men carry these things, half memory and half legend, but the bones of it solid. 3 years without a loss. That was the figure the room knew her by. Not 3 years of easy fights. 3 years against men. In that part of the world, in those years, a woman who fought men and kept winning didn't get to do it quietly. She got a reputation that walked into the room ahead of her, and hers had. By the time she came to that gym in 1971, the men there already knew the number. 3 years. Nobody had put her down. She wasn't big. My father was clear about that, and it matters. She was maybe 5'7", lean the way a Muay Thai fighter is lean, all rope and angle, nothing wasted. Her shins, he said, and he said this part slow, because it was the detail that stayed with him. Her shins were marked, dark along the bone. The way they get when a fighter has spent years kicking hard things on purpose, thousands of times, until the bone itself learns to stop being soft. A trainer in that room, one of the older men, had nodded at her shins when she walked in and said something quiet to the man next to him. My father was close enough to catch it. He said, "She's been doing this longer than you've been alive." That was the woman who walked the row. Now I have to do the hard thing here, which is to tell you about her without telling you what she was thinking, because I don't know what she was thinking, and the rule at our table was always that you don't put thoughts in people's heads you weren't inside of. So I'll tell you only what the room saw. The room saw her wrap her hands. Halfway. She never finished. That's the first strange thing, and my father noticed it, and so did the men, though none of them said it out loud until after. You don't walk a row of fighters looking for a partner with your hands half wrapped. You finish first. You finish, and then you choose. She didn't. She left the cotton trailing, and she walked. The room saw her go past the first man, a heavyweight, a head taller than her, who'd been working the heavy bag and stopped when she came near. He half-turned. He was ready to be picked. My father said you could see it in how his weight came forward onto the front foot, that small lean a man does when he thinks the moment is about to be his. She didn't even slow down. She went past the second man and the third. There was a Western boxer in that room that day. My father wasn't sure of his name. Said he was a club fighter from somewhere, big through the shoulders, the kind of man who'd been the hardest puncher in every room he'd ever stood in and knew it. He didn't lean forward. He did the opposite. He went still and dropped his chin a half-inch, reading her the way a man reads another fighter, and for a second the two of them measured each other down the length of the floor. She held his eyes for a moment. Then she walked past him too. My father said it was around here that the room started to change. Not loud yet, but the loudness was draining out of it, the way water drains out of a basin, slow, then all at once at the end. Because they were all working it out now. Every man she walked past was a man she'd looked at and measured and set down. And each one she passed made the next choice mean more, the way a card face down means more after you've turned the others up. The men behind her, the ones she'd already passed, they turned to watch her back. The men ahead of her went still as she came. She was reading the room, and the room felt itself being read. And there's a thing that happens to a row of men when they realize a fighter is choosing among them. My father understood it, and he made me understand it. Every one of them wanted to be picked, and every one of them was afraid to be. Both at once. Because to be picked by a fighter with that record, in front of everyone, was to be told you, and then to find out, in front of everyone, exactly what you was worth. So they stood there wanting it and dreading it, and she walked the row reading them, with the cotton swinging off her wrist. And at the far end of the room, near the bags, in the dusty gold light from the window, the smallest man in the gym had not stopped what he was doing. He was hitting the bag. Not hard. My father was specific about this, and I've kept it specific. He wasn't showing anyone anything. He was doing the thing he came to do, the way he always did the thing he came to do, like the rest of the room wasn't there. Light hands. Quick! The bag barely swung. He was working something small, some adjustment, the same 6 inches over and over, the way a man works a thing he's not satisfied with yet. He had his back half to her when she stopped walking. He didn't know she'd stopped. He was the only man in that room who didn't feel her stop, because he was the only man in that room not watching her, and that, my father said this years later, and I didn't understand it when I was 12, but I do now, that was the whole reason she stopped at him. She'd walked a row of men who were all watching her. She stopped at the one who wasn't. She raised her wrapped hand. She pointed one finger at the back of a gray t-shirt across the silent room. And she said his name. That's where my father always paused. Right there. Every time he told it. Because the room had gone quiet on a stranger, they'd watched her pass the heavyweight and the boxer and all the rest, and they'd thought, the way you think watching a hand of cards, who, then, who's left, who's she going to? And then she said a name, and it was a name half the room had stopped wondering about, because he was the small one, he was the quiet one near the bags. He didn't even fight here regular. Somebody had brought him. And when she said it, my father said, two things happened in the same second. The small man turned around. And one of the older trainers, the one who'd nodded at her shins, made a sound. Not a word, just a breath let out through the nose, sharp, because he was the only other person in that room who'd already understood what she'd done, and seeing it land made him let the breath go. She'd chosen the one man who hadn't been trying to be chosen. The gray t-shirt turned, and the afternoon turned with it, and the man near the window, who was my father, leaned back against the wall and got ready to watch, because he could feel, the way you feel a fall starting, that he was about to see something he'd be telling people about for the rest of his life. He was right. He told it to me at that kitchen table more times than I can count, and now I'm telling it to you, and we've only just gotten to the part where Bruce turned around. He turned around, and for a moment he just looked at her. My father said the look went on a beat too long to be polite, and a beat too short to be a challenge. He looked at her the way you look at a thing that's been put in front of you that you weren't expecting. Not surprised exactly, my father said, because he didn't think this man got surprised, but recalibrating, taking in the new information. The wrapped hand, the finger, the half-finished wrap trailing, the marked shins. Then he looked at her shins. My father caught that, and he held on to it. Because of everyone in that room, only two people looked at her shins that afternoon, the old trainer and the small man near the bags. Everyone else looked at her face or her hands, or her record walking in ahead of her. He looked at her shins, and my father said something went across his face, small, gone fast, that on anyone else you'd have called recognition. He'd read what the trainer read. He knew what she was before she'd thrown anything. And he nodded. Once. Not big. He set the bag still with one hand, the way you'd quiet a swinging door, and he stepped away from it onto the open floor. The room made space without anyone moving their feet. You know how that happens. 40 men and nobody steps back, and yet the floor opens, the air opens. A circle that isn't drawn gets drawn. My father told this part of the story like this. I'm going to give it to you the way he gave it to me, and where he was inside the thing, he saw I'm going to put you inside it too, because that's how he told it. He stopped being a man against a wall, and he became the room itself. So here it is the way he saw it. The light came in long from the high windows. Late afternoon, dust in it, the gold gone a little orange the way it does before it goes. The floor was old wood, worn pale down the middle where men had crossed it 10,000 times, darker at the edges. Heavy bags along the one wall, still now, the one he'd been hitting still swinging the smallest amount, a half-inch each way, slowing. 8 feet between them. She stood with her weight settled even, both feet under her, hands up but loose, the half-wrap trailing off the left one. lean, marked shins, calm. 3 years in that stance, and it showed in how little of her was tense, only what needed to be. He stood lighter, weight back, a touch on the rear foot, hands low, lower than hers. My father said it looked almost careless, the hands that low, and that the boxer in the room, the club fighter, the hard puncher, shifted his weight when he saw the hands that low, because to a man who lived by his hands that low looked like a gift. The small man's hands weren't a gift. My father knew that, and the trainer knew that, and she knew that. Hands that low meant he wasn't worried about the distance. He'd already measured the distance. 8 feet. He knew what 8 feet was worth to her, and what it was worth to him, and he'd put his hands where his hands were because the 8 feet was doing the work the hands would otherwise do. Nobody moved. Then she came first. Of course she came first. My father said this, and the trainer would have said it too. She came first because that was hers. The forward pressure, the Muay Thai engine that walks a man down and takes his space and turns him into something that only reacts. 3 years she'd won by coming. You don't change what wins. She came in behind a low kick, the lead leg, the marked shin, fast and flat and aimed at the outside of his front thigh, the kick that doesn't end a fight but takes a fight, that turns a man's lead leg to dead meat over 3 or 4 of them until he can't stand on it, and then everything else is easy. It was a good kick. My father said even he could see it was a good kick, fast, no telegraph, the hip already turning before the foot left the floor. It didn't land. It didn't land, and this is the part my father told slow, because he said the kick didn't get blocked and it didn't get caught, it just didn't find anything where it went. The small man's front leg wasn't there when her shin arrived. He hadn't jumped it, hadn't lifted it high and obvious. He just moved it. A few inches. Offline. The leg was somewhere her kick wasn't, and her shin went through the gold dusty air where his thigh had been a quarter second before, and the momentum of a missed kick that hard is its own small punishment, because now her hips were turned and her weight was committed, and there was a half beat where she was finishing a thing that hadn't hit anything. He read the kick before she finished the word that her body said. He'd seen the hip turn. He'd already decided where the leg was going. He moved the target, not the man. And in the half beat, while her weight came back down from a kick that hit nothing, he closed maybe 2 feet of the 8. Then he stopped. He didn't hit her. That's the thing. My father said the whole room got ready for him to hit her, in that half beat, when she was turned and committed and open, and he was suddenly 2 feet closer. Every man in that room felt the opening the way you feel a draft, and they got ready to see him take it. He didn't take it. He closed the distance, and he stopped inside it, close now, close enough that the 8 feet was 3 feet, and he just let her recover. Let her weight come back down. Let her feet get back under her. Let her be a fighter again instead of a fighter who just missed. And then he stepped back out. Out to where he'd been. Hands low. Weight back. Like nothing. My father said the room didn't understand it. He said he didn't understand it, not then. It looked like mercy, and it wasn't mercy. The trainer understood it. The old man made that sound again, the breath through the nose, because the old man knew what he just watched, which was a man showing a fighter, without a word, exactly how completely he could have ended it, and then choosing the longer thing instead. He wasn't going to beat her in one exchange. He was going to let her find out across the whole afternoon. She found out something in that first exchange, too. My father saw it, and I've kept it, because it's the first time the thing turns. The first time it stops being her walking a row and choosing, and starts being something she has to solve. She reset. She brought her hands back up, settled her weight, and she looked at him different. Not afraid, my father was clear. Never afraid, not once that whole afternoon, and he respected her for it the rest of his life. But different. She'd thrown her best opening kick, the one that had started 3 years of wins, the one that took men's legs and took men's space, and it had hit nothing, and the man who made it hit nothing hadn't even hit her back. She'd walked the row and chosen the small one, because he wasn't watching her. Now she understood why he hadn't needed to watch her. He'd been watching her the whole time, just not with his eyes pointed at her. My father said he didn't have the words for that as a young man, and got them slowly over a life, that there's a kind of attention that doesn't look like attention, that the man near the bags hitting the same 6 inches over and over had felt her walk that entire row, had clocked every man she passed, and how, had read her in the way she moved past the heavyweight and held the boxer's eyes, and had known, before she said his name, that she was going to say his name. He'd let her think she chose him. He'd been choosing this since she walked in. She came again. This time my father said she came smarter. She didn't lead with a leg. She closed behind her hands, jab, jab, pressure, walking him toward the wall of bags, trying to take the floor away from him, trying to put his back against something so the moving had somewhere to stop. That was the answer to a man who wasn't there when you kicked. Take away the there he could move to. Shrink the room. 3 years had taught her that, and she reached for it fast, which my father said was the mark of a real fighter. Not that her first thing worked, but how quick her second thing came when the first thing didn't. It almost worked. He gave ground. He let her walk him, back and back toward the bags, and the room leaned with it, and for a few seconds it looked like she'd solved him, like she'd turned the small, quick man into a man, with a wall coming up behind him and nowhere left to be somewhere else. His heel found the first bag. And that's where my father stopped, every single time he told it, because that's where she had him, back to the bags, hands up, walked all the way across his own floor by a woman 2/3 his weight with 3 years and no losses, and that's the picture you have to hold, because what he did next was the thing my father carried to the end of his life. I'll tell you what he did. But not yet. That's where the coffee always went cold. Right there. He'd lean back and the story would go quiet, and he'd look at the middle distance the way he did when he was back in that gold room against that wall, 20-something years old, watching the smallest man in the gym stand with his heels against the heavy bags and a champion's hands coming up. I'd say, and then what? And he'd say, and then. And he'd let it sit. He liked to let it sit. He learned that from telling it, I think, that the sitting was part of it, that a thing held back gets heavier, that you don't pour the water out of your cupped hands just because somebody at the table is thirsty. So I'll do what he did. I'll let it sit. His heels were against the bags. Her hands were coming up. The whole room had stopped breathing. And the light was going orange now, the long gold light, the part of the afternoon where it tips over toward evening, and you can feel the day starting to end even though there's still plenty of it left. There was still plenty of this left. His heels were against the bags, and he smiled. My father said it wasn't a fighter's smile, the kind men do to look like they are worried. He said it was smaller than that, and somewhere underneath it, and that it wasn't for her or for the room. He said it was the smile of a man who'd just found the thing he came to find. Like he'd been working that same 6 inches on the bag earlier waiting for exactly this. A real fighter, a real problem, his back to a wall and somebody good enough to put it there. She came in to close it. She came in hard, because you don't give a man room when you've finally taken his. And her hands came up and her weight came forward, and for one more half second it was hers. All of it. 3 years of it. The whole afternoon she'd built since she walked in with her hands half wrapped. He wasn't there. My father said he went sideways off the bag so fast that her hands hit where his ribs had been and kept going, into the bag, into the heavy bag itself, and the bag took the punch she'd meant for him and swung, and the sound of it, the dead heavy thud of a good shot landing on 100 pounds of sand, went through the silent room like the first thing anyone had heard in a minute. And he was already gone, out along the wall, back into the open floor, hands low again, weight back again, like nothing. He'd used the corner. He'd let her spend everything walking him into it, and then he'd used the one thing a corner gives the man who's in it. He'd made her commit to the kill, and a fighter committing to a kill is a fighter who stopped moving her feet, and the second her feet stopped he was past her and out, and the corner was hers now, the corner she'd worked so hard to build. And she was standing in it alone with a swinging bag and her hands stinging. The room understood that one. My father said this was the moment the room turned, not when he made the kick miss, not when he let her recover, but this, the bag still swinging, the small man back out in the open, the champion standing where she'd meant to pin him. Because now they'd seen it twice, and twice is a pattern, and a room of fighters knows what a pattern means. It meant he was better. Not a little. Not in a way you could argue about over a drink later. They'd brought a fighter with 3 years and no losses into a gym, and she'd done everything right. Everything her whole life had taught her. Every answer in order, fast and smart and hard, and he'd taken each answer and set it down gently somewhere it couldn't hurt him, and he hadn't yet thrown a single thing back. That was the part. My father said it more than once, and I want to say it the way he said it. He hadn't hit her yet. 2 exchanges, both of them hers, both of them his, and he'd touched her exactly never. He was solving her without striking her. He was reading 3 years of a fighter's life and answering it move for move with movement alone, with distance and timing and a few inches a thing needs to miss, and the only violence in the room so far was the violence she'd brought and spent on air and sand. The boxer, the hard puncher, the club fighter, my father said the boxer had stopped looking at her. He was watching the small man now, and his face had changed. Because the boxer had spent the whole first exchange thinking about those low hands, and what he'd do to a man who held his hands that low. And now he was watching the man with the low hands make a 3-year champion miss twice. And he was doing the arithmetic every fighter in that room was doing. The arithmetic was, I'm in here too. I'm one of the men in this room. If she couldn't, then I. My father said the boxer didn't finish that one. None of them did. You don't finish that one out loud. I want to stop the gym for a minute, because my father always did, around here, and tell you something that isn't about Bruce. It's about my father. He told me once, not while telling this story, a different time, a winter, the heat ticking in the pipes, that the thing he remembered most about that afternoon wasn't the small man at all. He said he could close his eyes any time he wanted and see the kick miss, see the bag swing, see the man come off the wall. He said those were easy. Those were the postcard. What stayed with him, he said, the thing he didn't have words for as a young man and got slowly, was the older trainer, the one who'd nodded at her shins, the one who made the sound through his nose. Because my father, leaning on that wall, 20-something, had thought he was watching a fight. And the old trainer, he said, hadn't been watching a fight at all. The old man had been watching it the way you watch a thing you already know the end of. Not bored, my father said, the opposite of bored, but settled. Like a man watching a tie come in. He wasn't waiting to find out who'd win. He'd known who'd win when she pointed. He was watching how. He was studying the way you study a craftsman, for the parts you can keep. My father said he spent a lot of his life after that trying to be the old trainer, and not the young man on the wall, trying to be the one who watches the how. He wasn't always. He told me this with the heat ticking and his coffee going cold the way it always did, and he turned the cup a quarter turn on the table, the way he did, and he said, "I was watching the wrong thing that day. I was watching to find out." And he meant the old man, not Bruce. He was watching to learn. I didn't understand that when I was 12. I turn a coffee cup a quarter turn on a table sometimes now, and I understand it. Back to the room. Because she wasn't done. This is the thing my father wanted me to carry about her, more than the record, more than the shins. She stood in the corner he'd given back to her, with a bag swinging and her hands stinging, and twice now everything she knew had hit nothing, and she did not break. A lesser fighter breaks there. My father had seen men break there. The two of them had been at it less than a minute, real time, and she'd already learned that her openings were his openings, that her pressure was his floor, that her record meant nothing to the man it was walking toward, and a lesser fighter, learning all that in under a minute, starts to come apart. Starts throwing things to throw them. Starts fighting the panic instead of the man. She didn't. She stopped. My father said she just stopped. Stood in the corner and lowered her hands a few inches and looked at him across the open floor he'd backed into, and breathed, and you could see her doing the thing he'd been doing the whole time. Reading. She'd sped her openings. Now she was going to spend nothing for a moment, and read him instead, the way he'd read her from the bags without his eyes pointed at her. She'd figured out what he was. Now she was trying to figure out how he did it. And the room got quiet in a new way. Not the held breath of waiting for violence. Something slower. Because what they were watching now wasn't a fight anymore. It was two fighters who'd both stopped pretending the other one was less than they were, standing 8 feet apart in the orange light, reading each other, and everyone in that room understood that they were watching something rare. Two people at the very top of a thing meeting. With nothing to prove, and nothing to hide, and no reason left to rush. The bag stopped swinging. Then, she moved differently after that. My father said he could see her change her whole approach in the space of one breath, which he said was its own kind of greatness, maybe greater than the 3 years, that she could stand at a corner having been answered twice and simply decide to become a different fighter. She stopped trying to walk him down. She stopped trying to take his floor. She'd learned that pressure fed him, that coming forward gave him your weight to read, that the engine that won her 3 years was the exact thing he was using against her. So she turned it off. She came out of the corner slow. Light. Her hands came back up, but they came up loose now. Low, almost like his. My father caught that, said she'd borrowed it, the low, loose hands, and that it was the highest thing one fighter can do to another, to take the thing that's beating you and start using it yourself in the middle of the fight. She stopped leading. She started waiting. She put her weight back, and she made him come to her, or come to nothing, and she made the 8 feet his problem instead of hers. She figured out the one thing that could work. If he lived on reading the man who came forward, then she would stop being the man who came forward. She'd make him solve a standing problem instead of a moving one. She'd make him commit first. It was the right answer. My father said it years later, with the certainty of a man who'd thought about it for decades. It was the only right answer, and she found it in under a minute, in a corner, against the best she'd ever faced. And most fighters go their whole lives and never find the right answer to anything that fast. And for a moment, my father held this moment too. He held all the good ones. For a moment it worked. She made him come. He came. He had to. She'd built it so he had to. 2 fighters both refusing to lead is 2 fighters standing still, and standing still forever isn't a thing. And she'd read that he was the one with the reason to close it, because he was the one who'd been controlling the distance all afternoon, and a man who controls distance can't control it from far away forever. So he closed it. He came in, finally, for the first time all afternoon, committing his own weight forward, and the whole room came forward with him, because this was it. This was the first time he'd truly come, and the first time she'd be reading him coming instead of the other way around. And for one bright second the thing was even. Both of them moving, both of them committed, the distance gone. 2 fighters meeting in the middle of the floor, in the orange light, with nothing held back. And my father leaned off the wall, because he could feel it, the way you feel a fall starting. He could feel that the next 2 seconds were the 2 seconds the whole afternoon had been walking towards since she pointed her finger across the silent room, and he leaned off the wall to see it, and so did the boxer, and so did the heavyweight, and so did the old trainer who'd known the ending since the beginning, and still leaned off the wall to see the how of it land. I'm going to tell you what happened when he came. But you know by now what I do with the part everyone leans off the wall to see. I hold it. The way he held it. The coffee's cold. The light's almost gone orange to gray. And the 2 best fighters in that room are meeting in the middle of the floor. They met in the middle of the floor. My father told this part of the story like this, and he told it slow, because it was the part the whole afternoon had been folding toward. He came forward and she was waiting, and for the first time all afternoon she had what she'd been trying to build, him moving toward her, him committed, his weight coming forward into a fighter who'd stopped feeding on forward weight and started feeding on stillness. She'd turned his own thing around. He was the one reaching now. He was the one with a target moving the few inches a target moves. She threw the right hand. Not a wild one. My father said it was the cleanest thing she threw all afternoon. Short, on balance, no wind up, the punch of somebody who'd waited and finally got the man to come to her and wasn't going to waste it. It went straight down the middle for his jaw, fast, the whole of 3 years behind it without any of 3 years' weight thrown away. It should have landed. My father said it for the rest of his life. That punch should have landed, and on any other man in that room it lands, and the afternoon ends there with the small quick man on the old pale wood, and a 4th year started without a loss. It didn't land. He moved his head. That's all. My father couldn't make it bigger than it was, however many times he told it, and he tried, because the smallness of it was the thing. He didn't slip it wide, didn't duck under, didn't throw his hands up. He moved his head off the line of it the exact distance it needed to move, and not 1 inch more, so that her clean right hand went past his jaw close enough that my father, against the wall, 20 feet away, swore he felt it go by, which can't be true, but that's how he told it, that he felt the wind of a punch that missed by 1 inch across the whole room. And here's the thing my father leaned off the wall for. He'd moved his head before she threw it. His head was already going off the line, while her shoulder was still loading the punch. He hadn't reacted to the right hand. He'd read the right hand, read it in her feet, in the way she'd set her weight when he came forward, in the fact that she'd spent the whole afternoon learning him, and a fighter who's just learned you throws the clean thing she's been saving, and he'd watched for it, and he'd already decided where his head would be when it came. He let her commit to the one good punch. He'd come forward to make her throw it. The stillness she built to trap him, he'd walked into it on purpose, because a fighter waiting in stillness has only one thing to do when the man finally comes, and that's throw, and he'd given her the come so she'd give him the throw, and he'd known what the throw would be before she knew she'd throw it. She'd turned his game around on him, and he'd let her, because her game turned around was still a game he was reading, and a fighter who thinks she's finally controlling the exchange is a fighter telling you everything she's about to do. Then, he was inside it now. Her right hand had gone past his jaw, and that meant her right side was open and her weight was past her front foot, and for the first time all afternoon she was the one finishing a thing that hadn't hit, and he was close, closer than he'd been since the corner, close enough that the 8 feet was no feet, and his hands were no longer low. My father said the room made a sound. Not a word. 40 men taking the same breath at the same time. Because this was it. This was the opening he'd been declining all afternoon. The kick miss, the corner. Every time he'd had her turned and spent and opened and chosen the longer thing. And here it was again, the biggest one yet. Her best punch gone by his jaw and her whole right side bare. And his hands up. And no distance left to be the reason he didn't. And the whole room got ready, the way they'd gotten ready twice before, to finally see the small man do the thing. My father got ready too. His hand came up. And he stopped it. Open. A palm. Flat against the side of her head where the punch would have gone, laid there, not driven. The way you'd stop a door, the way you'd quiet the swinging bag. My father said you could have heard it if the room had been breathing. A soft sound. A palm against the side of a head. No weight in it. No snap. Just the hand arriving exactly where the whole afternoon had earned the right to arrive, and arriving empty. He'd shown her the punch. He'd put his open hand where the knockout lived, and he'd let it rest there a half second, so that she'd feel it, so that the whole room would see it, so that everyone in that gold-going gray room would understand the same thing at the same time, that he could have, 3 times now, and the 3rd time with her best punch spent and her guard gone and nothing in the world to stop it. And that the only reason her head was still on her shoulders was that he had decided, 3 times, that it would be. Then he took the hand back. And he stepped out. That's the freeze. My father always stopped there, and I'm going to stop there, because he earned the stopping, and so have you. His open palm against the side of her head. The room not breathing. The bag still. The light gone from gold to that gray-orange that isn't really either. the light of a day deciding to be over. A champion with 3 years and no losses, frozen with her best punch spent and an open hand resting where the end of everything would have been. And the smallest man in the gym, 138 pounds of him, holding the whole afternoon in a palm he chose not to close. He could have. 3 times he could have. He didn't. And the question that hung in that room, my father said it hung there for the rest of the afternoon and for the rest of his life, and he passed it to me across a kitchen table, and I'm passing it to you. The question wasn't whether the small man could beat the champion. Everyone in that room had their answer to that. The question was why a man who could end a thing 3 times would choose 3 times to keep it going. What was he doing if he wasn't winning? I didn't understand this part when I was 12. My father told me the open hand and the stepping out, and I remember being almost angry about it, the way a kid is angry, because I wanted the small man to win. I wanted the punch. I wanted the end. And the end I wanted was the one he kept declining. I asked him why. Why didn't he just finish it? Why 3 times? My father didn't answer right away. He turned his coffee cup the quarter turn. And he said something I wrote down later, much later, after he was gone, because I'd been carrying it without the words, and one day the words came back. He said the small man wasn't fighting her. He said, and he was quiet about it, he didn't make it a lesson. He hated making things lessons. He said you don't bring a fighter with 3 years and no losses across a room with 1 finger because you want to beat her. The whole world had men he could beat. He could have stayed at the bag. He picked the 1 fighter in that room good enough to make him show all of it, and then he made her show all of hers, and the open hand wasn't him beating her. The open hand was him telling her the only thing worth crossing a room to tell another fighter. I see all of it, and I'm not going to take it. My father said she was the only person in that room he respected enough to spare on purpose. Everyone else he'd have just beaten. Her, he answered. I was 12. I wanted the punch. I'm older than my father was that afternoon now, and I'd give a lot to sit at that table one more time and tell him I finally get it. But she wasn't finished. And this is the turn my father loved most, the one that made him sit forward instead of back, because it's the turn that makes the whole story hers as much as his. She'd felt the open hand against the side of her head. She'd felt what it meant. A fighter feels that. A fighter knows the difference between a hand that missed and a hand that arrived and chose to be empty, and she knew, standing there with her best punch spent, exactly what he'd just shown her and exactly how many times he'd shown it. A lesser fighter is broken by that. My father had seen men broken by far less. By 1 clean answer, let alone 3, let alone an open hand laid against the head like a man closing a door he could have walked through. She wasn't broken by it. She stepped back. She got her feet under her. She brought her hands up, low now, loose, his way, the way she'd borrowed in the corner. And my father said she looked at him across the no distance now 8 feet again, and she did the last thing anyone in that room expected, the thing he'd remember past all the rest, past the kick and the corner and the open hand. She smiled. The same small smile he'd given her with his heels against the bags. The one that wasn't for the room. The one that meant there you are. She'd come looking for exactly this. She'd walked a row of men with 3 years behind her looking for the one who could show her something she hadn't seen, and she'd found him, and he'd shown her 3 times, and she smiled because the thing she crossed that room for had just happened to her. And she put her hands up to go again. She put her hands up to go again. And he stepped back, and he lowered his. My father told this part of the story like this, and it's the part one waited my whole childhood to understand and got, finally, at a table he wasn't sitting at anymore. She put her hands up, and he didn't put his up. He let his hands come down to his sides, all the way down, out of any stance at all, and he stood there in the gray-orange light, 138 pounds of him, with no guard, in front of a fighter with 3 years and no losses who just put her hands up to come again. And he shook his head. Once. Small. Not a no that turned her away. My father was careful about this, decades careful. Not a man dismissing her. Not a man done with her. Nothing like the heavyweights lean or the things lesser men do to look finished. A different no. A no that meant something the whole room understood, and not one of them could have said out loud. It meant we're done, and it has nothing to do with you not being enough. She held her hands up another second. My father said the second went on a long time. She stood with her hands up and her feet set, and the borrowed low loose guard and the smile fading off her face, not into anger, into something else, into the thing you feel when you finally understand the size of the room you walked into. And she looked at the man standing in front of her with his hands at his sides, no guard, no fear, no need, and she did the arithmetic the boxer had done and the heavyweight had done and the whole room had done. The arithmetic was simple, and it was terrible, and it was, my father said, the most respectful thing that ever happened to her in that gym or maybe anywhere. It was, he's lowered his hands. In front of me. After my best. And he's right to. Because the open hand had told her the truth, and a fighter that good doesn't get told the truth and pretend she didn't hear it. He could have 3 times. He'd shown her. And now he'd put his hands down in front of her to show her the 4th thing, the thing under the open hand, which was that it wasn't going to change. Not this round, not the next, not in an hour. She could go again. She could go all afternoon. And he would read her and answer her, and lay an empty hand against her head as many times as she came, and the only thing more rounds would buy her was more proof of the thing she already had complete proof of. He lowered his hands to spare her the rest of finding out. And she, this is the part, this is the whole thing, she lowered hers. She lowered her hands. My father said the room let out the breath it had been holding since she pointed her finger across it, and it let it out slow, because what they just watched end was not a thing that ends in a room very often, and they all knew it, even the young man on the wall who wouldn't have the words for 30 years. 2 fighters had met at the top of a thing. One of them was better. They both knew it, all the way down, no argument, the kind of knowing that doesn't need a knockout to make it true, and the better one had refused 3 times to make it ugly, and the other one, the 3 years no losses one, had been good enough to understand the refusal for what it was and graceful enough to accept it. She lowered her hands. And then she did the thing my father carried to the end. She brought them together, the wrapped one and the bare one, and she raised them to her face, and she gave him the why, the bow, the hands together bow of her own country, the one you give a teacher, the one you give a thing larger than you that has been kind to you anyway. She bowed to him. A champion with 3 years and no losses, in a gym full of men who had come to fight, bowed to the smallest one in the room. With her hands, she never finished wrapping pressed together at her face, in the last of the gray light. and he bowed back. That's the end of the fight. My father always said it like that. That's the end of the fight. And then he'd sit back, and the coffee would be long cold, and he'd let it sit, the way he'd let everything sit, and then he'd tell me the small thing after, which was the real end, which is why I've made you wait for it. After they bowed, the room started to move again. Men started to breathe and shift and find words, and the words came up out of them low and fast the way words do after a thing like that, and the floor that had opened without anyone moving started to close again. And the small man, my father watched this. It's the last thing he watched. The small man didn't go talk to anyone. He didn't go get told how good he was. He didn't look around the room to find his win in other men's faces. He walked back to the heavy bag. The same one. The one he'd been hitting when she pointed at him. The one her punch had thudded into when she missed him off the corner. And he set his feet, and he put his hands up, and he started again on the same 6 inches he'd been working before she ever said his name. Light hands. Quick. The bag barely swinging. The same small adjustment, over and over, like the whole afternoon hadn't happened, like the best fighter he might ever face in that gym hadn't just bowed to him in the gray light, like there was nothing in the world but the 6 inches he wasn't satisfied with yet. My father said that was the thing, not the open hand, not the bow. That he crossed the room with one finger to make a champion show him everything, and then made her stop without taking anything, and then went back to the bag like the bag was the part that mattered. Because to him, my father said, it was. I asked him once, older, not 12, but still not old enough. I asked him whether she ever came back, whether they fought again, whether anybody ever found out what would have happened if he closed the hand. My father turned the cup the quarter turn. He said no. He said she didn't come back, not that he ever heard, and he heard most things. He said maybe she went back to Thailand. He said maybe she kept fighting men and kept winning, with one afternoon in her she didn't talk about. The afternoon a small quiet man laid an empty hand against the side of her head 3 times and then bowed to her in the gray. He didn't know. He was honest about not knowing. That was the rule at the table. You don't fill the holes with things you'd like to be true. And he said the thing I've thought about more than anything else he ever told me. He said, "People always ask me who won." And he turned the cup. And he said, "She walked a row of 40 men and chose the one good enough to lose to. And he chose 3 times to let her live with having tried her best instead of having been knocked out. I don't know what you call that. But I don't think anybody lost." He told me that story at that kitchen table more times than I can count, and the coffee went cold every time. And every time he stopped in the same places and let the same things sit, and I used to think it was because he was old and told the same stories. I know now it was the other thing. I know now he was doing what the small man did with the open hand. Holding the thing he could have just handed me, so that when it finally arrived it would arrive with all its weight, so that I'd carry it instead of just hearing it. So that one day at a table he wasn't sitting and I'd turn a coffee cup a quarter turn and understand that the holding was the gift. She walked the row. She chose the one who wasn't watching her, because the one who wasn't watching her was the only one who'd already seen all of her. He let her come and answered everything she had, and 3 times put an open hand where the end was, and chose not to close it. And then he bowed. And then he went back to the bag. I don't tell this story as well as he did. I want to be honest about that. Here at the end, the way he was honest about not knowing whether she came back. He had something I don't have. He was there, against the wall, 20-something, and whatever I do with the words, I'm working from a room I never stood in, a light I never saw go from gold to gray, a sound I never heard, the soft empty arrival of a palm against the side of a head in a gym that stopped breathing. I'm working from his table. But I think that's all right. I think that's how these things are supposed to move. A man on a wall hands it to a man at a table, hands it to a kid who didn't understand it, hands it to you. Each of us loses a little of it and adds a little of our own. And what survives the trip is whatever was true enough to survive. What survived for me is small. It's not the kick or the corner or the punch that went past his jaw close enough to feel across a room. Those are the postcard, like my father said. They're easy. I could have made them up. What survived is the open hand. The choosing not to close it 3 times. The crossing of a whole room to make someone show you everything they have, and then refusing to take it from them. The idea, and I didn't have this at 12, I wanted the punch at 12. The idea that the most respect one person can pay another is to meet them all the way at the top of a thing and then decline, on purpose, gently, to win it ugly. To lay the empty hand where the end lives and take it back. And then go back to the bag. Because the bag was the part that mattered. My father's gone now. The table's mine. The cup's mine. I kept the cup, the actual one, which is a foolish thing to keep, and I kept it anyway. And sometimes I turn at the quarter turn without deciding to, and I catch myself, and I think there you are. He never told me where the gym was, exactly. He never gave me the year, or the names of the men against the wall, or whether the old trainer who watched it like a tide ever told anyone what he'd seen. He kept the holes empty. That was the rule. You don't fill the holes with things you'd like to be true. So I'll keep them empty too. There was a gym, and a long gold light going gray. There was a fighter who walked a row of 40 men and pointed at the one who wasn't watching her, because he was the only one who already had. There was an afternoon at the top of a thing that 2 people met, and one of them was better, and neither of them lost. There was an open hand that chose 3 times to arrive empty. And there was a man on a wall who watched it, and carried it the rest of his life, and set it down, finally, at a kitchen table, for a kid who'd one day be old enough to turn a cup a quarter turn and understand that the holding was the gift. That's the story. She put her hands up to go again. And he lowered his. And in the last of the gray light, in a room full of men who'd come to fight, the 2 best fighters there bowed to each other, and then the smaller one went back to the bag and started again on the same 6 inches he'd been working all along, like the rest of it had never happened. Because to him, it was the part that mattered. That's the end.